Recently, some people shared this post with me. Bluefin 2025 wrap-up, State of the Raptor. Now, most of this I don't really care about, as it's just, oh, this is what happened in 2025. It's very project-specific, and I'll leave a link down below if you want to read the entire thing, but that's not what we're doing here. Instead, I want to focus on one particular part. Project Bluefin distroless Dakota Raptor prototype generates a GNOME OS-based Bluefin OCI container, and here is a link over to the repo. Again, I'll leave this link down below. GitHub is just not going to load because we love GitHub. There we go. Thank you. Also, I've still not done the whole 2FA thing, so I'll get around to that. Since the bulk makes Bluefin is now just an OCI container, the base OS can be more easily abstracted away. This means that these repositories can now do way less than they were doing before. So Bluefin and the rest of the UBlue, Universal Blue projects, things like Aurora, Bazite, obviously Bluefin, Ucore, and various other things that are based on these, the point of them is effectively to show, obviously, the point of them is to be useful, but at a technical level, the point of them is to show that you can build an operating system out of Docker files and containers. If you're around any Universal Blue spaces, you're going to see a lot of talk about web native. Web native basically just means bringing container tech, which is very common on the web, and then bringing it to the desktop. With that out of the way, Bluefin's distroless future. This new Bluefin is nicknamed Dakota Raptor and will be our attempt to ship a production quality bootc image based on GNOME OS. So this is bootc. This is a dead link to bootc, apparently. Here is the actual bootc link. As it says down below, transactional in-place operating system updates using OCI/Docker container images. Basically, when you have an immutable, an atomic system, this is a way to handle updates for it. This gives us some benefits that we can't get from other images. Faster deployment of the best tech, systemd boot, systemd homed, and other UAPI tech will ship much faster here. We can finally say goodbye to Grub forever. Testing branches with development versions of GNOME so that new contributors can help upstream development, new GNOME and systemd teammates who are committed to driving and shaping the modern Linux desktop. This has been a boon for us since we're forging new working relationships with these upstream projects, and their help will keep us on the leading edge. And more, take charge of our destiny by working with our critical upstreams directly instead of waiting for traditional distributions to catch up. Dakota Raptor will not be for everyone, and will offer the least amount of compromises. Not only is local layering unsupported, so this is a way that on a lot of atomic distros, you would install a traditional package on top of the atomic immutable underlying system. There's no system package manager at all. So you'd be doing everything with containers, with flat packs, all this good stuff. We'll be using Buildstream since it's the tech behind this, and you'll hear more about it in 2026 as other projects check it out. And we'll talk more about those other projects in just a bit. Don't worry, we won't call it distroless. Thank God, because that is a horrible name. The other Bluefin OCI containers will still continue as before. Dakota Raptor will represent a faster development cycle, directly pulling from upstream while maintaining production quality. Think of distroless as a model flip. The source is the main thing we interact with, the Linux desktop, and that's GNOME. And then we can bolt on whatever kernel we want with modern Linuxes. This is straightforward to make. And since the system libraries for GNOME OS are just the free desktop and GNOME runtimes, we're running on the stuff that's already used by a ton of people. This way of assembly is new, but the payload is not. So the way they are building this is new, but it's not being built out of new components. It's the same components we already had, just sort of structured in a different way. That's why we're feeling confident about the quality out of the gate on this one. That just leaves a set of automation scripts and some config files. That's Bluefin. Distroless means spending more time with the things you love and not so much time with the delivery service. We're mostly just waiting for GNOME 50 to come out. Expect this one to be VM only for a while because it's going to be a new direction of doing things. It's going to be using Buildstream, which they weren't doing before. It's going to be something which is probably not going to be production ready out of the box, but again, they're feeling mostly confident about this not being a crazy long endeavor. Now, another project looking at Buildstream is KDE Linux. This is the first-party distro from the KDE project that is atomic and all of this good stuff. It's kind of like GNOME OS, but GNOME OS is mainly existing to be like a testing ground for GNOME developers, KDE Linux also wants to be something that they can hand to, hardware manufacturers and say, this is the best KDE experience. And currently, the project is based on Arch Linux because previously with KDE Neon, you'd have to deal with out-of-date dependencies, and it was a whole big mess. Arch Linux at least has the up-to-date dependencies, but it also has a lot of Arch Linux problems where a lot of the things you want aren't in the main repos. You need to bring in AUR stuff, and a whole big mess there. Now, about a month ago, and I was going to do a video on this, I just never got around to it, they were thinking of moving from Arch Linux over to Fedora Linux. Now, not everyone, because this was a fairly controversial move. A lot of people felt that going from Arch to Fedora didn't really fix that many problems, and being Fedora introduced a lot more. Now, Fedora's not bad, but being American-based, it has American software patent issues that you just kind of have to deal with if something is based in America. And then it kind of reintroduces problems they had from Debian, which is not having the most up-to-date dependencies. Now, it's a lot better of a state than Debian, where Debian has multiple years out of date. Fedora manages to ship modern versions of KDE, but if you want to have the latest of the latest dependencies, it's still going to be a little bit behind in certain areas. It's good for a regular user, but may not necessarily be exactly what they want for a distro like this. Now, at some point in the discussion, somebody raised Buildstream, going down the same route as GNOME OS. A few GNOME OS people got involved in this thread, and that's why you see a bunch of upvotes here. I'm pretty sure most of these people are GNOME people, so just keep that in mind. However, some people involved in KDE, like Hadichoka, were interested in doing this. Now, Neil, who was in favor of the Fedora approach, obviously wasn't, but Neil will tell you how great Fedora is at every step of the way. However, he did raise a reasonable concern going with the Buildstream route. It means that KDE Linux would have to own and lifecycle every single component. That's quite a bit more work, and not necessarily better for us. KDE runtimes already exist, you'd be merging efforts with the Flatpak people. A full bootable Linux distribution is quite a bit more than just the runtime, it's a lot more stuff and a lot more work. However, Adrian from the GNOME side does raise the point that a lot of the stuff that is core to the operating system, your low-level libraries, would be shared with GNOME OS anyway, so a lot of that work has really already been done with the free desktop SDK. Following on from that, and here we have Nate Graham. Changing the base would be a huge undertaking and require a large amount of QA and tweaking to get us to the point we're at now. No matter what we change... Is that an M dash? Some people actually use these in the real world, I didn't know that. So I'd like to see the pros and cons of staying versus changing articulated clearly in a digestible fashion, e.g. bullet points. Additionally, I'd like to consider not only what we gain by switching, e.g. solution to the problems in 4.10, that being upstream changes in Arch that would help us, but also what we'd lose that we'd need to work around. Given that Buildstream has been presented as a proposed alternative for both Arch and Fedora, it would be good to do the analysis for that option as well. Only with such analysis can we make an informed judgment regarding whether the labor required to switch the base to something else would be worth it. So 3 separate issues were made to discuss these different routes. Stay with Arch, move to Fedora, and move to Buildstream. Now, even though it's the status quo, Arch Linux is actually very, very mixed. Every time I come back to this, it's usually either exactly the same or like one slightly higher than the other. As for going to Fedora, this is probably the most negative one by far. And then Buildstream actually has some positivity around it. Not everyone. Some people wanted to go Fedora, some people did want to stay on Arch, but generally, out of the options, this is the least hated approach. And Buildstream being that same approach, being taken by Bluefin with its Dakota Raptor project. Now, KDE Linux is not saying distroless, but there are people in here also using that phrase. Distroless is some of this techie jargon that kind of exists to just make things more confusing by not actually talking about what is actually being done. So it's basically taking the Flatpak approach of having this shared runtime that is used by various different projects in your system, and then expanding that out from just applications you install to the entire operating system. So rather than building the project off of a Fedora base or an Ubuntu base or an Arch base, you would build it off of the free desktop SDK, which is used by GNOME OS, is going to be used by Dakota Raptor, and possibly is going to be used by KDE Linux as well. And then from there, because that base isn't going to cover everything, that's not going to have all of the changes you want to make on top of that, which in KDE Linux's case is including KDE, including all of the KDE tooling, the Plasma desktop, all this good stuff. So you take that base and then add on everything else you want to it. So you have this shared base model, which looks awfully like a distro, but it doesn't contain everything for an operating system, so technically it's not a distro. It's a pedantic difference. Also, you're not just going and installing the free desktop SDK like you would install something like Arch or Gentoo or Ubuntu, so it's a little bit different. It looks like a distro, it acts like a distro, you don't install it like a distro, so it's not really a distro, but it kind of is. Again, I think it's technical jargon that just makes things more confusing. One of the big differences between this approach with Buildstream and building off of a regular distro is it's supposed to be a very neutral project, a neutral position to build off of that closely follows upstream, rather than making these opinionated choices that might be best for individual users, right? If you're building a gaming distro, there are certain kinds of tweaks you would make. If you're building a production distro, like a media production distro or a server distro, there's various little tweaks you might be making for those different kinds of users. Obviously, people that are other kinds of users can use that as well, but they're not your main target. But with this, the idea is keep it as, like, basic as possible. The main changes that come are from the things being added on top of it. So in many ways, it puts these projects like KDE Linux, like GNOME OS, in the position of being a distro developer, being a software packager that has to worry about a lot more of the moving parts. A lot of those things which otherwise would have been handled by building off of something like Arch or Fedora, now you have to worry about them. Obviously, the free desktop base is going to cover a lot of those things, but it's not going to cover everything. And whilst this does give you a lot more control, it does come at the cost of potentially not having that sort of long-term expertise that comes with managing these components. If you're building off of Fedora, there is a lot of people in the Fedora community that are used to building random little components and know what little tweaks you need to make them behave in the exact way you want them to behave. When you're now doing all of that stuff for yourself, that creates a lot more work for you. It's certainly not an impossible amount of work. People in Fedora worked out how to do it. People in Ubuntu, people in Arch, people in all of these distros worked out how to build these packages. But is that trade-off, is doing it yourself to get that additional freedom actually worth the effort? And here is what Nate and Neil had to say. Folks are focusing on how much it would be to package everything ourselves, but is it really everything though? We can use the free desktop runtime as the base, which already exists. We'd only need to package anything we need that's not already in it. And if there's anything we'd package that's also of interest to GNOME OS folks, we could collaborate on an OS extras runtime to share the burden. This does violate the no packaging required mantra, but to be honest, I'm wondering how realistic it really is. From Neil, the initial packaging is the easy part. Honestly, it's everything that follows from which is harder. Being skilled in all things is no small feat. I kind of alluded to it in 459, that being the one about switching to Fedora base, but basically, it comes down to engaging in the relationship and development/maintenance work for all the components across the stack. Within the KDE community, our expertise in the layers below KDE, Linux, systemd, various libraries, etc. is limited. But when it comes to KDE, when it comes to the desktop, they have the expertise. Of course, we can try to develop that, but it's not easy to do and requires considerably more people to avoid them burning out. Being based on another Linux distribution mitigates that to the degree that the base distribution has those capabilities and is interested in downstream reports. Part of the reason I advocate for Fedora in this case is that I believe that it will be a serious improvement over the situation with Arch and avoids a good chunk of this problem, because then the relationship building is simpler, engaging with Fedora maintainers who already have these relationships with upstream projects and are willing to help out. When I helped move RC Linux from Arch Linux ARM to Fedora 3 years ago, this turned out to be a huge benefit to them, because when weird problems showed up, the people maintaining the package were at least able to help us resolve problems reasonably quickly. So at this stage, nothing has been fully confirmed, nothing has actually been fully moved over, but there is definitely some interest in making this happen. I'll be curious to see what actually happens with this project, and long term, I'm kind of curious to see just what happens with KDE Linux, and if this becomes this, like, amazing first-party look at KDE, or it's kind of like more KDE Neon, where developers use it sometimes, and that's kind of it. So, let me know your thoughts down below. Do you think this whole approach to immutable atomic systems with this whole Buildstream thing is interesting? Or, like, even if it's not something you'd personally use, do you find it at least, like, interesting that people are trying things out? That's what we'll go with. So, let me know down below. If you liked the video, go like the video, go subscribe as well, and if you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon subscribes daily bearer pay linked in the description down below. That's gonna be it for me, and I didn't think of what to say here. Go build something. Something like this.